I think you've developed the new IETF meme thing where we all have to remotely coordinate the shirts. So we need the shirt coordination protocol, or SCP.
Hey, good morning, Jed. Let's see here. Share screen. Yes, I really want to share my screen. Let's see here. I want to share this one here, right? Allow. That looks pretty good. I really don't want to share my screen. Martin, you can just, we have 30 seconds. If you're telling me I'm doing something wrong here, please please let me know. Martin commenting there. All right, we should begin prompt.
He meant screen versus an application.
Okay. All right. I'll remain blissfully ignorant just for the moment on that point, because otherwise we won't get the meeting going, and we have to get the meeting going. First of all, welcome to the RFC Editor Future program. We need to really start. Everybody, I think, on this call has been very actively participating. The group has been very active. Thank you for that. I know that a number of people are double booked, and I wish we could have done something better about that. Maybe we'll do something better about that in the future. And the best thing we can do, I think, is to be efficient in terms of in terms of our proceedings today. Let's see here. With that, just a reminder to note well. During our interims, we've had all of our veterans show up who have always noted well. Thank you for that. For those who are unfamiliar with the note well, please just take a moment. This is our IPR policies, our anti-harassment policies, working group processes, you name it, all of our policies are there in one shot. If you have any questions about any of these policies as relates to this group, please don't hesitate to reach out to the chairs, who are yours truly, Elliot Lear, and or Brian Rosen. Okay, let's proceed just a little bit further. Mark, I'll try to moderate just a little bit here for you. All right, here's our agenda. We've already successfully concluded number 1 on our agenda. We have a little bit of administrative to cover. There's one thing that isn't on the agenda here, which I'll just mention towards the end. We're going to continue on the proposal that Adrian had with a bit of a perhaps a tweak to it, or a slight alternate from Joel. Joel, so that you know, I've uploaded your slides. So if you want, you can present them, or I can present them. We'll get that to you. We'll get to you in just a little bit.
You can present them. I saw you uploaded. Thank you.
You want to present them, or you want me to, Joel?
If you present them.
Okay. Very good. I will do that. It will take me just a moment to bring them up, but patience will be required. Okay. We will then take some discussion. I suspect we may not get beyond item number 3 here in terms of the issues, but if we do, everybody's getting an ice cream, because that would be really hard work done, and it would be really nice to be able to. This is a big. Once we get beyond this, I think we will really have momentum to complete our tasks. There are some other issues we can then tackle if we do have a little extra time. We do have a next meeting date. I'll talk about that in a little bit, and insert somewhere between that and the end. We now also have a volunteer for a document editor, for those of you who have read email. For those of you who are just getting up, you may not have seen that, and so you'll get some news in a little bit. Any agenda bashing? Okay. Brian's going to be managing the floor and interrupting me regularly if need be, in order for the floor to in order to do that, because I sometimes don't see the floor requests.
Put
All right.
your floor requests as queue in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, moving right along. So just by way of review, some of you may recall Adrian spent some time. He put forward a proposal. We think we have agreement on the not so controversial stuff, and we just you'll see that there are a couple questions at the end. That's from our last interim. Things that we have to work out, just a little bit of detail around in terms of document adoption. I think these are separate from or I wouldn't say separate. I think these are just in addition to this in what's in A. So we pretty much agreed that the working group's going to go through its process to develop documents, and then gain rough consensus, roughly speaking, using the same sort of processes that you would see in an IETF working group. We agreed that there would be a working group last call. I think where it says how long does the last call last, I think we agreed it would be 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the document used with the chair using discussion. And I see from Peter Santandre that he's having some technical issues. So if you need to direct anything to Peter, you should do so in Jabber, or at least he'll reply to you in Jabber because he's on the audio stream, the other audio stream. Then there's the working group will then consider public comments review. I say agreed here. Well, we have to figure out where to send it, and then there really is a little bit more work to do here, just in terms of handling resolution after the working group last call. If things changed, you need to issue another one, and I'm sure that there's going to be some words about the chairs are going to need to use a little bit of judgment if if it's not a big deal in terms of the tweaks. Probably a last call isn't called for. If they're big tweaks, probably a last call is called for. Then we got into participation by members of the approval group. Here we didn't actually finish up who the approval body is. We didn't even talk about that in the last meeting, really. And it was just sort of assumed that it was the stream managers, but I think we have a couple of different ideas floating around there. The other thing that we left open is what happens if somebody can't participate. Should there be an alternate? This is something that Miriam proposed, and we didn't close on that. So these are some things we probably need to close on here. Then there is further discussion. One of the things I think we said we were pretty close to done on this one. The only thing is that we think probably, and this is something that I believe Mike St. John suggested, was that we should just move this either into or directly behind C in terms of once the working group sends the document off, this is what happens next. And this is about as far as we got. F, we talked about whether there would be a yes, no, abstain, discuss, and we've had a couple of proposals since then, including return to working group, and you'll see I think another one from Joel in his proposal. There was I think a pretty healthy debate about this, and we need to firm up our positions here. I don't think these are as I think I said in an email, I don't think anything here is a showstopper. We're just polishing a little bit on what the names are, and I think whether we need these other components. And the abstain aspect here, this ties directly to whether there's an alternate. One of the issues that was raised the last time is what would the alternate be for the independent submissions editor stream, and that would be something that would have to be worked through. Then reasons for discuss. Here again we had some issues relating to this was relating to why somebody might raise a discuss or a return to group or a or whatever, I think it's a concern that Joel is going to mention later. And so there were sort of three choices, right, that we had in here. And I think everybody was pretty comfortable with this. There was some amount of angst over this and some amount of angst over this. But there was no consensus necessarily to remove those just yet, but no consensus to move forward. And so we'll need to go through that a little bit more in terms of how we're proceeding. And I believe, yeah, that is pretty much as far as we got. So with that, what I propose is to just pause for a moment. Does anybody have any questions? I'm not asking for debate at this point. Just questions about the preceding meeting or other topics. Okay. I'm just gonna see if I can fiddle with the display to make sure that I'm not missing anybody. I think Brian would tell me that. Okay. Oh, there's Eric. Welcome, Eric. And good morning to you. Eric, if you're in the queue, you can go ahead. If you're not in the queue, please just remove yourself. Okay. Don't know if we have a tools problem. It looks like Eric's asking for the floor to me, but I don't know if we have to do anything here to otherwise help Eric, but
No, he's out now.
okay. All right. So what I propose to do at this point then is to invite Joel to present the work that he's done. I will ask you to just bear with me as I bring up his slides. Did I put them in? Just a moment. I thought I had, but I guess I did not. Okay. Just a moment.
If it'll make things easier, I guess I can present them. I just thought it would be cleaner if you just kept control of the screen.
Let me just make sure that I. Ha! Wait a minute. I have to share. I have to reshare. Just a moment. I have the slides up. You just can't see them. Let's see.
Okay. While you're bringing them up, I'll just comment. The first few slides are recapitulation because I wasn't sure how much context would be set, and when I was writing the slides, I wanted to make sure I had a context in my head. So, just if the first couple look like recapitulation, it's because they are.
Okay. It should be just a moment. Here we go. All right.
There we are. Let's go to this is my effort to try to put some proposal on the table based on what we'd seen before. As we said, there will be a working group open to everybody. They'll use procedures somewhat modified after the classic IETF procedures, and for this purpose, I didn't want to get into all the details of that. We've had some discussion. Go on. Next slide, please. And there is an approvals board. Actually, can you go to, no, full screen will kill you. I'm afraid people are going to have trouble reading these. They're a little, it's looking a little small on my screen. There, that helps. Thank you. So there will be an approvals board, as Elliot just went through, and some of the details of what the approvals board is what we're going to try to go through right now. Next slide. So the basic process, I'm focused again on the approvals board here. When the working group finishes a document and approves it for adoption, it goes to the approvals board. While the document is being circulated to a larger community, as was mentioned, the board members will carefully review the document. As we said, we expect them to have already participated in the working group, but they need to review it at this point. After a suitable time, and I'm being deliberately vague on the time, my own preferences in terms of time for the approvals board is to leave it to them, but we can to work out their procedures, but that's a detail we can specify. The only votes that they are allowed to register are yes, concern, and recuse. Recuse is specifically for, I have a conflict. I can't appropriately vote on this. And if a document is approved, if all the votes are yes or recuse, and if a weird case for all but one member recuse, and with the remaining one says yes, it's approved. I'm not worrying about weird corner cases. You must have a minimum. In fact, if they all recuse, then it becomes approved. It's just too bad. I went with concern as the name for the other vote. I listened to the discussion. I didn't want the name of the position to be the same as the disposition, so I didn't like return to working group as the name of the vote. And there was concern about discuss because of the burden, and concern about no because of its implications. So I'm suggesting we call the position somebody is taking that is an explicit position and not yes to be concern, i.e. expressing a concern about the document. That is enough of a concern that something needs to be dealt with. Next slide. So, and I tried to keep things simple. There are only two kinds of concerns, and all of them must be accompanied by clear and understandable explanations of what it is that's the problem. I'm not, unlike the IESG discuss policy, they may not be actionable. I can't, if the concern is this will destroy the stream, I don't want to insist that they specify a specific action to fix it. The concern is the concern. So I'm not saying it must be actionable, but it has to be clear and understandable. The first kind of reason is causing a serious problem for the group that a particular member is charged to represent. And I picked that wording to be able to separate out what was the third category of concern in the earlier proposal to keep it much cleaner. If somebody is on the approvals board charged with representing foo, and this causes serious problems for foo, then that's a concern that they have the right to raise. And the second kind, therefore, is a concern that causes serious harm to the overall series, including the long-term health and viability. And this is explicitly any board member, any member of the approvals board can raise this. I'm not saying there's one person who's charged with this. In fact, by serving on this board, all of the members are agreeing to be looking out for this. So these are the criteria I'm proposing. Are there any questions about the criteria piece? Not about what happens with them, but just these two criteria. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Mike, go ahead while he's going to the next slide. Mike?
Sorry, I have to relearn the whole thing.
Yeah.
Current concern, serious concern versus concern. Serious harm versus harm. I don't know that it needs to be even serious. I think if there's a problem, it needs to be identified, not just a. Yeah, we're gonna have to I think if you've got to rework something on a stream, it's a harm. So just don't go that far.
Just go with harm and problem.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm not going to try to edit them on the fly, but I think whoever's taking minutes can note that. And assuming that the new document editor ends up turning this into text in a draft, assuming we actually agree to it, then they can, whatever we agree on that can become things. Ecker, I think, has a responding position. Go ahead, Eric. Ecker, can you unmute? If not, type in the chat and I'll repeat.
Oh, sorry. I'm like trying to like follow two working groups. I'm not doing it very well. I mean, so like, I'm not sure if I did the exact wording here, but I want to register that like any proposal that is worth doing is going to cause some inconvenience to somebody. And so the idea that like, if it causes any harm whatsoever, like that the stream managers are empowered to block it does not seem awesome. So I guess I was pretty comfortable after some thinking. So first of all, Joel, thanks for putting this together. I guess I should say that first. I was pretty comfortable after thinking with the set of criteria, in part because I just came to the conclusion that trying to really nail it down was not going to work super well. But I think we should try to get people the right idea. And I think the right idea is that if you're actually letting someone have that kind of vague position, then it has to be pretty bad, as opposed to just I think this is going to cause some minor difficulty, because like I say, anything is going to cause some difficulty. Anyway, I think we can take, but I think generally this is a pretty sound list, so I'm willing to fight that battle at some later point.
Okay, we're good. Thanks for that, Ecker, and I want to just acknowledge the difficulty again of the conflicts that particularly you are having to sustain in terms of this meeting, and I know others are too. Joel?
Okay, Brian asked in the chat, do we need recuse if we have alternates? I was actually not assuming there were alternates, in part because it gets really confusing. Suppose there's two documents on the table and somebody is saying, I can't vote on A, but I'll take care of my job on B. Do we have an alternate for A? It just struck me as creating a complication that we don't need, and recusal should be extraordinarily rare. So I just thought it was much simpler to focus on, these are the members, these are the recusal conditions, and so that's why I wrote it this way. I didn't go for alternates and all of the. I'm trying to keep this simple, because if we make it too complicated, we will find we have written corner cases that don't work the way we want. But back to serious, significant versus just leaving out the word serious. I have no problem personally if we change serious to significant. That's a mach's nichts for me. I do think actually we want to emphasize that it's got to rise to a noticeable level. And I disagree with Mike that just any harm. But let's go to the next slide, because I believe there were questions about that too. But I wanted to get the positions on before we got to what do we do about them. So the question then becomes, what happens if somebody raises a concern? The desired approach would be that the working group listens and goes, oh, okay, we'll just fix it. But that is presumably unlikely as the natural outcome, no matter, but everybody should always, in the whole process, keep in mind, that's what would be the desired result. A suitable fix is found, the working group does it, and we move on. But presumably this was already raised during the working group, because we've already said all the members of the approvals board have to be participating in the working group. That's their commitment as part of this. They have to be raising their concerns. I mean, we won't write it into the rules they have to. If they find the concern at the last minute, they can raise it, but it would be expected that they would raise things during that. That's their job. So that's what, so that's, well, the desired outcome, I don't actually expect it to happen. So then what happens? After an appropriate amount of time, and as I said, I'm being vague about times. If we need to, we can nail them. If we can leave it to the board, that's fine. There's a formal vote can be taken to override the concern. And if only one board member has the concern, that's it. The rest of them say no, the override is done, the document is approved. If after the discussion, at least two board members, presumably the one raising concern and at least one more, I don't know how else you'd get to. It'd be really weird for person A to raise the concern, decide it doesn't apply, but persons B and C to apply the concern, but the way I've written it, it would still be there. If they really feel that's a showstopper, then the document is returned to the working group. The working group can do whatever it likes with it, but the working group will be aware of the substance of concern and that it's unlikely to be approved until something is fixed. Yes, this allows the working group to keep sending it back if that, and that, I don't know, I rather than trying to solve that problem, I think everybody would realize, wait, we have a problem here, and they'll figure out a way to solve it if that's what's happening. So keeping it simple, but focusing on there's an override if there's only one person with the procedure.
Becker?
So, so this general thing seems plausible. I would like to put a pin in the question of how many people we need to override, because there's a subsequent question about whether the RSC is part of this board. And while I'm comfortable with this number, if the RSC is not part of this board, I'm less comfortable if it is. So, so I want to approve it. Say I approve this, except I want to put like a red circle on the two or something, right?
Fair enough. And we'll get back to the membership in the slide or two, because that is indeed an important question. Okay. Next. So there is the membership and relationship. My view is to keep this small, and that it would be, my proposal is it's the stream heads, which is currently 4. That number could go up or down, and things happen. And the paid professional technical publishing expert, which is the long phrase I use for what we're calling the RSC or RSA or whatever. I wanted to be clear. There are no explicit term limits on those members. There are no members appointed by any other bodies, because it seemed to me that would just make things really hard. I mean, trying to put term limits on the stream representative seems to be putting limits on the way the streams do things. They all have their own policies which provide term limits. Putting a term limit on the paid professional technical publishing expert seemed exactly backwards. Experience is what we want with that person. There is no formal appeals process in this proposal. This was one of the things that was discussed last time, and so I thought it was important to say. There's 2 reasons why I wrote that this way. First, it hurt my head every time I went to think about the appeals process. I went, who would you appeal to? On what basis? How would you? It hurt my head. Maybe we could craft something, but it didn't seem it was worth the pain, because all of the board members, including the paid professional, are responsible to somebody. The paid professional is responsible to their contracting authority. The stream representatives are responsible to whomever appoints the stream head, whether it is the IRTF chair who's appointed by the IAB, whether it is the ISE, whether it is the IETF chair or the IAB chair or their delegate. Those people are responsible to somebody. Given how long the other appeals processes take and how ineffective they are, if somebody is messing up, and really for somebody to be messing up on this board in a way that matters, you'd have to have at least 2 people messing up for there to be reasons to appeal, at which point I'm going, trying to figure out how to unwind conspiracy is beyond me. Mark, you have a comment.
Hang on just a moment. Before Mark and Eric go forward, I want to just talk about structuring discussion on this slide, because there's a lot here. Okay, a whole lot here. And what I'll ask is, what I'd like to do is sort of go bullet by bullet and just see, let's see if we're all in general agreement and let's find out where we have issues, if people will bear with me on that. So let's start with, I think nobody's really disagreeing with this, but if you do disagree, now is the time. Throw up a hand and indicate whether you think that this is an inappropriate statement. Okay. So Mark, if you disagree with this point, go ahead and speak. Otherwise, bear with me for a moment. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. All right. Then the next part, I'm going to say, I think we all are pretty comfortable with this part here, right? Any comments, concerns about the stream heads? I think we've been over this multiple times. I'm not expecting any objections, but I'll give you the opportunity now. All right. Not seeing hands. Now we have this part here, okay? That was the hand I was expecting. I'm sure there might be others. Eric, go ahead.
I mean, I think someone else is not muted.
That might be me.
Okay. So I actually agree with what I'm not saying, which is having the discussions sort of in tiny little pieces like this is not super helpful. So I just want to surface that may not be the most useful thing. But I didn't get up to say that. To recap, I think my position from like last time, I think that the stream heads have a form of democratic legitimacy, which is they were appointed by structure and by the organization as a whole, and the RC, PPE, whatever it is not. And so I think that they have an important voice, and I think we have a structure that allows them to have that voice, and not think they should be in the decision-making loop. I think we need a clear distinction between people who are like democratically or community appointed and people who are engaged professionals.
Mike?
Yeah, that's one way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it is this person's got a responsibility and has to be involved with the selection of things that are going to fall within their responsibility. Now, I know everybody's going to come along and say, oh, well, they're not a member of the community, they're just hired people. This is how we got in the problem in the first place. This is not just a contractor. This is a senior member of the community, and we want them to be. We want them to be there for quite a while. Again, when you said small approvals board, I skipped over it because I thought I would get a chance to talk about additional people besides these 5 people. So can we come back to that later on, Elliot?
Sure. Okay.
Martin.
Just that Echo's point about pigs and chickens really matters here. And the stream heads are directly responsible for something that will be affected by this. I don't see that the advisor, as an expert with opinions, has the same degree of commitment to actually being responsible for something. And so, as Echo said, give them ample opportunity to make their voice heard, but saying no, on what basis?
Mark.
Did that work?
Yeah.
Okay. Lots of buttons to click. So yeah, I agree with one of these things is not like the others. The mechanism for assuring that the RSA, RSC, whatever we call this person, is aligned with and acting in a responsible fashion is different than all the mechanisms for the stream managers. And so I'm somewhat comforted that, as described, that a single person can't necessarily carry the day with this, that they have to convince someone else. I think that's a reasonable constraint. But I do think that this really highlights that we need to consider, this person needs some freedom of action and they need some comfort that they're going to keep their position. I absolutely agree. But we also need to make sure that this person is not serving the community well and or they go off the rails. We have an effective way to, either address that behavior or ultimately replace them that doesn't involve blowing up the entire organization and starting a new program behind every time that happens. Hopefully it's not a common occurrence, but I do think we need to think about that potential future.
Yeah, let me just interject on that point. Mark, that I think that's well said in terms of not wanting to have to go through this again. So one of the things that I think people should be thinking about is as we begin to compile this proposal, have we achieved that goal? And I don't think it's any one particular thing relating to the RSC or relating to the RSOC or other things, but people might have different views as to how we got here. But if you read through the proposal, do you think as it develops, right, as it gets edited up, do you think we're meeting that goal? So thanks for raising that point.
And I'll just add that if we do meet that goal, then my concern about this point is, I think, largely addressed. If there is an effective, mechanism, just like the stream editors, then this is probably okay. This is certainly in the ballpark.
Okay, thank you. Adrian.
Yeah, so I like what Mark said. I think that both the ability to override a single position and the understanding of how a hired professional might be constrained by their employers is important. I also think it's important to understand what the remit of this hired professional is. And possibly this was something Mike was coming towards, but I don't think we have in this structure addressed who is responsible for the needs of the consumers and contributors to the RFCs beyond the streams. And I know we talked about this before and we kind of pushed it around a bit, but we didn't, as far as I recall, ever say who carried that responsibility. So if, for example, somebody is sitting there in the advisory board, approvals board, sorry, and sees that an action would be harmful to a significant proportion of the people that consume the RFCs, but not specifically harmful to the streams, then I don't see how that issue gets raised unless it belongs to somebody. And perhaps it belongs to the technical publishing expert and perhaps it doesn't, but without that job spec, we don't know.
Yeah, so this issue has been raised before. Stick with me for just a moment, Adrian. Just to recount the last time we covered this ground, I believe there was one view that stood out to me, which is that aspect, like how do we even establish accountability to this broader community? That aspect needed to be developed, and that is probably something that could be done by the working group that gets created out of this process. This is what I heard and saw from that discussion, and I think Stephen Farrell had comments on that in particular. So one question I think we have to ask is this something that we solve now or something that we solve as we evolve the process? Do you have thoughts on that, Adrian?
Well, in general, and assuming best will and good behavior on all parts, yeah, we can leave that till later. There is a slight corner case of, well, what happens if something bad happens in the first few months before that piece of process has been sorted out.
Thank you very much. Joel.
Okay, so just to touch on Adrian's point, the wording on the specific, the first kind of concern was specifically written so that if we decide somebody represents some particular constituency, like the readers or whatever, then that would then fall into the rest of the process, so we could separate the two pieces of what are the votes and what are the representations. On the bigger issue, this is the point where Ecker and I fear that this whole camp is split. I think that it is very important that the paid professional, the RSA, be a full voting member of this board. And one example of that was the idea that somebody floated in the chat, that there might be a situation where the rest of the board could go into executive session without them, separate from a recusal by the professional. Obviously, if the topic is how much is the professional paid or whether they're paid, they would recuse. But separate from that question, I just don't want to see it set up where they are not a full member of this board. And one of the ways you recognize who are your full members are who gets the say in the end. And I think it's very important they have as much of a say as anyone else. And that's why I put in an explicit override. While I'd prefer to keep it to one vote, I could even live with Ecker with it being requiring 2 other members to sustain the vote. So that it is, but that's, I'm much more concerned that they have a full voting member, because otherwise we get a relationship that is not, in my view, as healthy. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. You'll be back. Colin.
Yeah.
I'm understanding the reasons for the stream heads to have a vote here, because they have the legitimacy to represent their streams, and they're clearly concerned with the overall health of the series. Since if the series is not healthy, then obviously their stream is not healthy, and it impacts their stream. And I understand why they would take advice from a professional publishing expert. I'm not understanding what would be the rationale for the publishing expert to have have a vote on this this approvals board. Clearly they're an advisor, and clearly they're an important advisor, but I don't understand where they get the legitimacy to have the vote from.
Okay, I'm going to ask those people who want to answer to Colin on that point to get in the queue behind Mike, just to make sure that that question does get touched upon, because I think a number of people have it. Ecker.
Yeah, so I guess I sort of wanted to respond to a point that was made earlier, which is how, I think by Adrian, how did these points get raised? I think is what Adrian asked. And I think that's the critical distinction between, I think, my view and perhaps Joel's view. So I think it's worth worth trying to flesh out a little bit, which is I think it is important that those points get raised, and I think that that we need a structure to ensure that they do get raised. And I think that like a reasonable expectation is the advisor will be responsible for raising them. I think a fundamental question is who has the final say, and so I think it's important to distinguish between the ability to raise points and the ability to actually block the work going forward. And so it's only that I object to in terms of having the advisor have a vote. Not, I'm certainly quite comfortable with a pile of different mechanisms to ensure that their points are raised and heard, as long as the communities, the people responsible for making the ultimate decision, which I think is consistent with the kind of quasi democracy we run here.
Ecker, stay with me for just a moment. This relates to the previous slide in which we put a pin in. Does Joel's increasing the number necessary to block or to add to send a concern back? Does that help ameliorate your concerns?
I guess I think here's a situation where it's maybe difficult to distinguish between formal and practical concerns. As a practical matter, if you required 2 board members to block, then you would be in the same situation as if you had a simple majority with a current 4-person board. So I guess maybe that doesn't matter. But we don't know that the board will be constant size. And I also frankly just think this is the wrong message. So I thought about this a bit, and I'm not as perhaps strongly opposed as I was to the original proposal. But I still think it'd be substantially better to set the right expectations, which is that people who have equities vote and people who do not have equities do not vote. So I'm not ready to decide on that proposal at this point.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I really wish we talked about how large the body was first, rather than this particular rat hole we've gotten down into. And I'm actually going to start in that space. If the RFC is only 1 vote on a board of 5, then yeah, maybe there's a problem. I don't know. I don't actually think there is. If the RFC is 1 vote on a board of 8, where we include the stream members and we bring in some longer term members via the non-com, that doesn't become as much of a problem. There's also the question, we're still in this mode that is loving the consensus of the board as opposed to a vote of the board. And we should probably stop thinking about that, and actually just say, you know, if 5 members of the board approve the thing on an 8-member board, or 4 members approve it on a 7-member board, it goes forward, you know, or something along those lines. So.
Miria. And Ecker, unless you want to speak again, maybe take your hand down, please.
Yeah, so I'm really not sure how this practical could work to put the RSA or whatever this is called on the board, because we will hire somebody who's like not from our community yet, because we want expertise on publishing, which is not really what we have in this community. And for a person who comes from the outside, it takes a while, a year or two, to actually understand how our community works. And then this is kind of getting a long-term commitment, right? If we have somebody there who like had take 2 years to understand what's going on, we want to really keep that person. We cannot just like exchange this person very quickly. So with that sense, with the idea that we actually want to have outside expertise that we can consult, and that we can be more flexible than we have been, and not putting ourselves into like this little corner that we have been in, I don't think it's a good idea to put this person on the board with a ballot position.
Okay, thank you, Miria. Mike, you want to take, it looks like thus far you might have the last word on this, but for the moment, you want to say that? You want to go ahead and take them?
Yeah, so I was going to start typing into, hang on, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's complaining it can't see audio. One of the things with respect to the board as currently constituted here is the IAB appoints 3 of the 4 members, directly or indirectly. So I would like to have some balance that's not IAB overridable, if you will, in some ways. Now, I'm not saying they will, but you need a balance in that particular model to what we've currently got. I'm not worried about the RSA. I'm actually worried about the 3 guys, the RS appointed by the IAB, the independent series guy, and the research folks. So.
Okay. I think at least for the moment, everybody has had their say on where we stand between whether this person has a vote or not. As I understand, there are a couple. I'm just going to recapitulate a couple of issues so that we're clear on people's positions. There's one concern that has been raised, which is that the RSEA doesn't directly represent a particular constituency. Now, that is disputed, at least at some level, in the notion that the RSEA has to represent the readership. And so that's one aspect of the disagreement, if you will. The second area where we've heard, I think, a little bit of disagreement is should there be more people other than just the stream heads and or this other person, as Mike just spoke to that point. The third point that was raised was what's the voting process? Should the discussion of consensus versus vote, I think, also came up. Now, in my understanding at this point, these are basically the same issues that have come up again and again. So we are, I think, a little bit in a jam on this point. And I think that Brian and I have been sort of chatting in the background as to whether we should poll on this issue, assuming one of us can figure out how to use the polling tool. And maybe it's probably a good idea to get a hum along these lines. I have somewhat been averse to trying to do that with the hope that we would find solutions that people would be, shall we say, least unhappy by. But maybe we do need at least a sense of the room. Brian, do you want to comment a little bit on this? Do you have thoughts?
Well, I would like to see where we are. We haven't tried running polls to see where we are, and we may be all over the. We may be, 50-50, 70-30, 90-10. Who knows? And I think I'd like to see where we are. I think the only question is there one question? Is the RSEA a voting member of the board, or do you want to do? Are they a member of the board and non-voting as separate issues? Leaving off the are there more people on the board and how many votes does it take for another question. I think this fundamental issue of do they vote is the thing that I want to understand where the work group is. We clearly have some people want it and some people who don't.
And I think for this vote, Brian, I think we should probably do two polls. One is where it's one plus, the person who made the first concern, and then along with one other, and then the second is what Joel also suggested, which is the person who made this concern plus two others, and to see if that makes a substantial difference in people's thoughts. So, Brian, do you want to try and arrange the poll?
Yeah, I've got it. Wes wanted to speak.
Okay.
Yeah, so
ahead,
I think running a poll is a good idea. The thing that I am concerned with is that there seems to be a fundamental larger issue that is being danced around with all of the questions that Mike in particular has pointed up, right, which is whether or not this particular individual is on the board is a sub-question to the larger question I don't know how to phrase, which is, what is the balance of power makeup need to be within the larger structure of the board in order so that there is fairness represented across the board? So Mike, brought up the concern that if 3 of the members are appointed by the IAB, then that gives the IAB too much power. And so I don't really know how to even phrase the problem space of what should the power structure be so that nobody has power. And so whether or not this particular person is on it, that question may be subservient to a bigger issue.
We can back up to just ask the question. It
does seem to me that there are not that the people who want the person to be a voting member have varying opinions about how overridable that vote is, but that's the fundamental issue for them. They've got to vote, and there is definitely a group of people who say no, they don't represent a stream. They're a hired hand. They don't get a vote, and that's the fundamental issue. And all the other issues, how many votes it takes to override, who else is on the board, are independent of that. Do they get a? It may be that there are people who say, well, I'll let them have a vote if they can be buried by the other guys. If that's true, if there are people who say, well, yeah, that's okay if they have a vote as long as they have a really small vote. I think is the issue. I think in Joel's point was that there is no blocker. No one can block. It takes at least one other person to do. And I think we've all agreed to that. I don't hear anybody objecting to that. So no one gets a block, including the RSAE, whatever it is, if we say it. So I don't know if people want to speak to this. I'm still trying to make sure that we don't have a bazillion choices and that we get to the heart of the matter as quickly as possible.
And just to add, I think that different people may have different views as to what the heart of the matter is. right? So why don't we at least start with the question, and let me see if I can just phrase this right, is how many people are comfortable with this? What, if we just take this proposal as it stands, with the four stream heads and the paid professional publishing expert. Why don't, is that where you want to start, Brian?
I just want to ask the question, is the RFCA a voting member of the board?
Why don't we start with that? So if you can figure out the polling tool.
So there's a poll. Is an RFCA a voting member of the board? Please vote. Well, raise your hands. It's not a vote.
And
typically go to the show of hands tool in the upper right.
To be clear, if you're do not raising a hand, you're voting no, right?
Yes. Please, we would really like to get a sense of where the work group is. If we really are 50-50-ish in the middle, we have a lot more work to reach consensus. If it really is a small number of people on one side and a very large number of people on the other side, then we have a consensus. We're trying to do this. So I'd appreciate it if there are 45 participants, 17 have expressed an opinion. We'd really appreciate if you put something up there.
Wait just another 30 seconds for people to consider this, and then I think we have to move on. Please, if you haven't expressed a view, please do so at this point. All right, just another few moments here. Last call. If you want to vote, if you want to raise your hand or not raise your hand, please do so now.
Yeah, we have roughly half the people, half the participants haven't expressed an opinion. The other half have not.
Okay, and that could be because they're between sessions. All right.
One quick thing about how I believe that the voting tool is supposed to work, right? In the same way that you do hums, because you don't know if everybody is going to vote. You have to do the positive and negative sides of the questions as two separate votes. So you have to do a raise your hand if you want them to be, and then put that down, and then do, if you specifically don't want them to be a voting member, then do the opposite.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that.
Well, I think Martin has the point, right? We don't have a rough consensus. We have a significant number. You can see by the current. I'll go the other way just to see what happens. Let's do that. We'll go the other way. I'll flip the question around.
So for those who aren't seeing it, there were 44 participants that are available according to the tool. 15 raised their hand and 8 did not. And 8 do not raise hand. So you're going to do the next one then, Brian?
I'm going to do it the other way. Should it not have a vote? So then you can. That just makes sure that we know what's going on. RSEA, I'm going to use the consistent, and I'll start it again. So now a raise hand is a no. They shouldn't have a vote.
So here's the real test: is if we get different results,
Okay.
Yeah.
Eh,
So hopefully if you voted the last time, you'll vote this time, please.
yeah. Yeah, just we'd like to see the same result the other way, just so that we know what we're seeing.
We're seeing no rough consensus.
Yeah.
Okay. Give it a couple more seconds, please. Express your opinion.
Okay, last call. If anybody hasn't voted, please do so now.
Okay. Let's. It's not the same, but it's close enough. We understand where we are. All right, I'm going to end the session. So
What are the two raised hands? Ah, thank you.
okay. One was 13-9, the other was 15-8. You know, it's okay. So what do you want to do at this point? You want to ask more questions or keep working? I mean, we don't have rough consensus. That's pretty clear. But it's also clear that there are more people who want a voting member than not. So we perhaps, following the discussion, should be talking about the question of who's on the board, and the question of how many votes does it take to override.
Right.
That's a concern.
I mean, I think we really have to get over this hump, and maybe we haven't been imaginative enough in our approaches here. But I guess what I would ask for a little bit of discussion in terms of, particularly, let's start with the people who would prefer the RSEA not have a vote. For those people who voted in that direction, the question I have to ask you is, what would make you comfortable, what would make it at least acceptable for the RSCA to have a vote? Under what circumstances would that be okay, or least painful, or least undesirable in terms of effects? Martin, then Mark.
Right. So the thing that I was thinking about this was, this person doesn't have any constituency. So we would need to have a system of checks and balances in place, essentially. They would need to be answerable to some community or some group in order to be confident that those votes were not individually motivated or any of the other sort of failure modes that we might imagine. And as I'm seeing, you continue to use the word vote, which distresses me still. I think that the reason that I'm against this as well is that vote means block. Even though you can't do it alone, you have the power to block approvals which reflect the consensus of the community, and that's a weighty responsibility.
Mark.
Hello? Yes? No?
Yeah, we can hear.
This is really weird. So I agree with Martin that we need to have a discussion about what the constraints on this person are. You know, how we can give them some form of concrete oversight, as discussed, and that would give me a lot of comfort about them being on this board. I think also if we change it so that two or some other larger than one number of participants of the board are required to truly block something would also give me a lot of comfort about this person being on the board. I think those are the two obvious things in front of us. I understand the arguments for the people are making as to why this person needs to be on the board. I don't have a strong fundamental objection to them being on the board. I just think that we need to think through, as has been said so many times, the pig and chicken kind of nature here, that one of these people is not like the other. That's why I voted no, and I'd happily vote yes to have this person on the board if we had those discussions.
Becker.
Yeah, so I think I'm somewhere between Martin and Mark, probably more towards Martin. Namely, I think there's a fundamental legitimacy question here, and that makes me pretty uncomfortable with it, no matter how the voting is done. But certainly, I would be more comfortable with it if basically the power was substantially diluted. What I'm most concerned with is that the community's decisions are ones that get enacted, and that someone who is, while a member of the community, not a representative of the community, does not get to stop those decisions from being enacted. And so. And so I think that's the fundamental consideration in any case. And I think it's important to distinguish, again, between representative of the community and member of the community. And the stream managers are representatives of the community as well as members of the community, whereas because the way it is selected, the advisor is only a member of the community.
Eric, given the number of people who think that they ought to be a voting member, is there some way that you can see to get your concerns addressed that lets the RSAA be a voting member? Or is it just fundamentally not possible in your mind for that to be fair?
Well, I mean, if they have one vote and everybody else is 100, I mean, you know, I mean, more importantly, like I mean, so my point is that, like, what I'm trying to avoid is a situation in which there's a deciding question on an important issue, whether or not we go forward. And I think that is not the key question that people are concerned about. If people think it's symbolic, then sure, let's start a situation when it's only symbolic.
No, I'm looking for compromise. I'm trying to figure out if there is a compromise.
So I want to step back. I reject the premise that because we have marginally more people in this particular meeting in favor of A versus B, that means the people who are in favor of B need to compromise. I do not agree with that. Okay. So like, if you're planning to ask them the same question, then I'm on board. But if what you're saying is like we have marginally more people in this particular tally, like A versus B, then that's just not the right way to proceed.
Okay.
Okay, I'm happy to ask the question the other way around, but before we do, let's go to Mike and then we'll do that.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what Ecker was saying, and he was talking about one specific meeting, and I think the votes on these things are just basically the votes on these things. They're going to until they get to it's not going to be a meeting-based vote, but a process-based vote. So I don't know how that applies, and I may have missed something. I had to run out, grab some water.
This had to do with the poll that we just took, I think, so let me turn it around and say, for those who would really want the person to be a board member, or the RSEA to be a board member, what would make you comfortable in that person not being a board member? Is there anything that are there approaches that could be applied that would make you comfortable with the person not being a board member? Would anybody like to take the floor on that? Okay, so I'm not seeing really anybody wanting to take the floor on that. This puts the chairs in a difficult position. Okay, all right, John and then Blon.
Yeah, I think this comes back to one of those age-old, at this point, fundamental discussions. A board which represents only the streams is not representing the user community and representing the broader interests and stability of the series. It's representing the interests of the streams. And no matter how you couch the responsibilities of those stream members to that broader view, it really doesn't change anything. Having the RSEA be a member of the board, but not voting, but who cannot be excluded from meetings, maybe having a board which is larger or to somehow represent the community better than maybe, but the situation where the streams or even just the 3 people appointed by the IAB can get together and say whatever it is that the publication's interest and the broader community interest is doesn't count because we want it the way we want it within the IETF community, but not the broader reader and user and procurement communities, doesn't work. And as I say, that's one of those fundamental arguments which in a variety of different forms has been going on not only since this group was constituted, but is ultimately the source of the problem that got us here.
Okay, Brian?
Say very similar things to what John said there, but also, I mean, there's 2 things. One of which is the diversity of the people on the board and the views, and this person's going to be fairly intimately involved in what's going on the board. So having them have a say rather than sit in meetings and having no say, most of the time it won't make much difference unless we're going purely consensus decision making in all of this. It's going to be a case where they're only having a voice, but at least they have a voice. I think being in this situation and not having a voice at all would be much more difficult. Would I be happy the other way around? If we can get a good person who's happy living like that, then yes, but I think it's a position with a lot of responsibility, and giving that responsibility without any voice is going to be uncomfortable for the person in that position, and I don't see the strength of the argument against it really. Unless there's half the streams are going one way, half the streams are going the other way, they're still not going to be outvoted. But at least the editor gets to state their case and put their position down.
And thank you for turning on your camera. It's nice to see you. And then Colin.
Hi. Yeah, I'm not quite sure that we're all on the same page with what the role of the RSEA is, and that might be part of this. I mean, the previous comment that they have a lot, it's a position with a lot of responsibility. Is it, or is it a relatively small role giving advice on technical publishing aspects? And that might be part of the confusion here and part of the disagreement.
As it happened, we actually came to some amount of consensus on the role of the RSEA. And if you look in the issue tracker, I think you'll find some text around that. Let me just see if I can bring that up. One of the things while I'm doing that I wanted to mention was that the issue tracker, and actually the home of the program on GitHub has changed its name. It's now the int archboard stroke program -RFCED future. This happened this past week, and there's a let's see here. Yeah, there's a redirect so that the right things should happen. And I believe if we look at issue number 12, right, let me just see if I can find that. Just a moment. This is the one. Right, this is the one that the text is actually linked into another GitHub document. And let me just see if I can manage to share that. Just a minute. Hello. Having a moment with Firefox here. Go back to this, and now I click on this. All right. Hello. Oh, I'm hitting the wrong button. Select the window. It is this here. So here's what we agreed on, actually. Just so that people have that in their mind. One thing we didn't agree on, by the way, was the name. That's something that's not agreed. But this was, we did agree on this some time ago. Okay. Let me come back. If people are happy with it or have seen this, you can find it yourself off the GitHub page, which is linked into our charter. Let me go back and now continue to share Joel's slides. Button for that. So by my measure, you know, we had one poll. Let me ask a different question. If we did, given what you just saw, number one, if we assume that there is a, let me restate this. What I'm wondering is, assuming that the RSEA is in fact responsible for this group of readership that John and Joel and Adrian and others have mentioned, would adding some appointments, say from ISOC, make a difference to people, particularly to people who didn't want the person on the board? And let's see here. I think Miria, you're trying to get a word in.
Yeah, I put my hand up when you still showed the description of the RSA. And I think like the underlying assumption I was making was that like for this position, we are looking for an external expert. And when we hire this person might like not really know our community. So at the point where we hire this person is not really a community member yet. And I think it takes a while until this person can understand what's happening in the community. So that's my assumption. And I believe that other people assume that we hire a person who already is a community member and knows how the community works. And that's a big difference for me. And that's not anything that the text says. But I believe that's like where we're kind of talking past each other a little bit.
So I think there are multiple issues, of course, on the table, Miria. One question I would ask you is, how would you view this person, say, vis-a-vis another board where you have external members come on to the board? We have most corporations have external members come in. How would you view that as different or the same, or what would you see the comparison as?
So I think we have on the LSD, we have actually people who are like coming more from the outside, just learning our community. But you know, there's also this very specific expertise, and they are not kind of voting on documents. They are not kind of voting on changing our process. They are very much bind, but the process they can do bind on what community consensus is. And here we're having a body where you actually kind of can block community consensus. So that's a huge difference for me.
Okay.
And I want to say one more thing. The reason why I had this assumption that we would hire somebody who's kind of a little bit on the outside is also because I don't want us to get in this position again where we have like this one specific person which has like all the skills we need, and then when this person leaves for whatever reason, we're in this situation again where we're completely lost, right? I want to make it much more easier to find people to help us in this position, and then also, if needed, to, you know, make it easier to find somebody new.
Let me ask a different question in response to that. Would having sort of a deputy or somebody who might be the you know, a natural successor on board, would that alleviate that sort of a concern?
Not quite sure what you mean, but like, I think it's the same. I don't want to make this position dependent on like a very small set of people. I really want to have a bigger set of people that we can fill this position with.
Okay. Colin.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think Maria said a lot of things I would agree with. I think coming back to the question you posed before that, which was about, you know, assuming this person is representing the the sort of broader community, the broader readership, and so on. But that doesn't seem to be the role which is in the GitHub issue. So we seem to be, again, we seem to be circling around what the role of this person is, and I'm still not convinced we're all on the same page about that.
Joel.
Your comments conflated things in a way that is really confusing for me. Yes, I expect we will have to go outside the community to get a suitable expert as the RSA. Yes, that means they will need to learn about the community. But I also assume they are professionals and will not stick their oar in on, well, the community needs X or Y until they've actually gotten up to speed on the community. That's not how professionals work. So I have trouble with your concern that they should not have a vote because at the first part they won't know the community. If we hire a skilled professional who is appropriate to hire, they won't be making statements that are not grounded when they don't have the information. That's part of being a professional.
Let me reply very quickly. I think this is like, hopefully that's true, but I wouldn't just like bet on it. That's not the design, not the system I want to design and run.
Worst case, I've said, if they can't persuade at least one other stream head of their point of view, then they get overridden and they haven't done any damage. If they're really out in left field.
Yeah, that's actually another thing. I'm not, that's something we should discuss. I'm not convinced that this overriding structure is a good thing. I mean, probably you need this as a corner case in a very spare case, but hopefully that's not a process we apply all the time.
Okay, let's move on. Bron?
I think
something similar.
Sorry. Go on.
Yep.
Go on.
To what Joel just said, and also to add that often the new voice coming in from outside will see stuff that wasn't necessarily seen by people who've been around for a long time. By creating a process where only someone who's already an expert in everything IETF gets any say at all, we're creating a very strong echo chamber for ourselves, and we're not allowing new ideas in very much. And I think that would also be a challenge here, that we're setting it up saying, until you're already, you know, well educated in the ways of IETF and fully brought into the groupthink, we can't allow the voice. That was my point.
John?
Yeah, a strong agreement with what Joel and Braun have said already. Let me add one more thing to that list, which is that if you're looking for a high level, or two more things, one of which is that if you're looking for a high level professional for this position, telling them when you're recruiting them that they don't have a voice, that they can offer opinions, but people may not pay any attention to them, and may, following the precedent that got us into this trouble, be able to lock them out of meetings and discussions of what's going on, is a really good way not to be able to hire such a professional. So there's an interaction there with who's likely to be interested in the job, and beyond that, I want to reinforce what Joel said, which is that if this person is standing up and blocking things which they don't understand because the community because they're out of touch with the community and don't understand they're out of touch with the community and can't be convinced they're out of touch with the community, then we've done a rather bad job of finding the right person to hire. And I recognize the risks there, but this gets back to the question of whether we can actually recruit and hire somebody who's suitable for this job. If we can, then I see no objection to giving them a vote, following again on the previous two comments. If we cannot, then this whole discussion is standing on quicksand. Thank you.
John, Jeffrey.
We're hiring this advisor or editor because they're an expert on publishing, and that's likely to be an expertise that is a small minority in the working group. And so it seems worth it if they see us making a mistake from a publishing standpoint. It's worth giving them that veto and letting them kick it back to the working group, especially if that veto is overridable by the rest of the board, if there's consensus against them.
Okay, Martin.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead,
So
Martin.
I only really got here to address comments that that Bron made, and then John said something. So I think the question of direct power versus the ability to be heard is getting lost here, and the straw man that I saw erected in John's response to that was quite a problematic one. I think what we're trying to find is a way for this person to be a respected and constructive member of this community, and to provide their expertise in the best possible way. Offering them a vote as a carrot as part of the hiring process, I think is putting the wrong sort of incentive structure in place. I think one of the key things here is making sure that they are treated as a professional and listened to. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking a vote. It doesn't mean that they have a seat with a vote on the approval board. It just means that we have a system in place for them to be heard when they have something to say. And I think ex officio was one of the things that people have floated in the chat, and that sounds like it could be perfectly reasonable.
All right, so 2 points. Before you go away, Martin, I just wondered if you wanted to respond to the point that Jeffrey Yaskin made in terms of the aspect of expertise that can be outvoted, lost, or otherwise shouted down, as sometimes happens in working groups, and this is a concern that's been raised by others. What would be your response to that?
Yeah, I've heard this objection repeated on a number of occasions, and I don't see that happening. I think we've had a number of occasions where there has been the lone voice in a working group, and there has been genuine attempts to understand and reconcile that position. I don't think we're talking about a whole bunch of teenagers here, despite the behavior that we often see. And so I don't think that this is something that is going to enter into that position. And if that person cannot convince one of the approval board's members that they should exercise their vote to block and reject something, then I think then that's a problem.
Okay, wow. Bron and then Joel.
Said there, which is that they should be able to convince another person, one of the stream people, to exercise their block. If they can't convince them at all, then they have the option of resigning, which is pretty much where you're at that point. If you feel really strongly about something and you can't convince any of the stream managers, then you would resign. But that would be the case whether you had a vote or not. So I don't see having the vote making much difference either way in all of this. And so it comes back to, is having the vote a sign of respect that will make the position easier to get people for or not? And that, I think, is a major area of disagreement in the working group.
Thank you, Joel.
Okay, I mean, the way I proposed this, that any member had to be able to propose it, had to be able to persuade at least one other member to support them to get their view sustained. That seemed like the right balance for all of the streams. If one stream is saying, for all of the participants, because if one stream is saying, this hurts my stream, and everybody else looks at them and goes, but I don't think it does, then they probably are wrong, and you just keep, and we go forward. But if somebody else agrees with them, whether it's the RSA or another stream head, then you force the issue. And while I'm willing to accept that you need to get a total of three of the members to support a concern, I think we're better off with two, because if you can get two people saying, wait, no, this is big enough that it matters, then it probably matters. And making the RSA one of those people makes sure that there's a voice that is not focused principally on a single stream, but on the series as a whole, participating as a full equal member of the discussion. And yes, we can say they must be respected, but lots and lots of history shows us that it's not the same thing. The IESG has gone back and forth on how they treat the IAB chair in terms of membership on the IESG, and that one is they're a full member even. So let's try to keep this as simple, clean, and respectful as possible.
Yeah, and that raises a point that I caused some confusion on a while ago. Ex officio just means one sits on the board based on one's position. It doesn't necessarily mean anything else. And as somebody else said, everybody on that board at the moment is ex officio in terms of how it's defined. I think we're up to Pete on this point. Good morning, Pete.
Can't hear you, Pete.
Lots of buttons to push in my browser to give it permission. So I think, looking at the Jabber chat, I agree with Joel that it still requires the Rfcefdp, whatever, to find one other person to agree with. And what Martin has said in the Jabber chat is, well, but that's enough to delay the process. Delaying the process doesn't bother me that much in this case. If the RSA feels strongly that this is a problem, and the expectation is that everybody on this board is going to be given the message that your expectation is you're doing what is best for the community here, and that the community is going to eventually agree to, then the RSA throwing up a hand and saying, whoa, I think this really does need to stop. I think the problem attack surface here is pretty minimal, right? I see absolutely no reason that this person shouldn't have a say in stopping a document that they think is really a problem, and coming back around and finding one other person to support them. And the delay is worth it at that point. We're talking about someone who eventually the community can say to the LLC, fire this person, they're an idiot, if that comes down to it. So the community does have a pushback point if the person is really out of control, in the same way that we have a pushback point with all of the other stream head appointees. I think we should go ahead and give them the ability to say that.
Thanks very much, Pete. Rich, of course you have a solution for us all. Go on.
Yeah, sure. Just give me in charge, put me in charge of everything. Yeah, so I'm more worried about the IETF and its participants behaving badly to the paid professionals than the paid professionals doing something wrong that will hurt the IETF. And so optimize the common case, as they say. We have plenty of experience with people behaving badly and causing competent people to get frustrated and leave, not just paid professionals and otherwise. As Pete just said, we have a way we can influence or moderate behavior if the paid professional goes off the rails, but I'm not worried about that happening. Thanks.
Rich. Phil, good morning. Good morning to you, yes.
Yes. So yeah, well, Rich said half of what I was going to say. I agree that the problem is probably the opposite way around. But the other thing is that, hey, look, if the IETF was a representative organization in which we actually voted for anybody, then we would have representatives, and the IAB and IASG would be answerable to the community. They're not. There are no representatives in IETF. I don't get to vote for anybody. So the idea that I've got to get really worried about the RSA not being part of a community yet getting a vote, I mean, like, I just don't see the distinction between having the LLC, IESG, or whoever appointing somebody and them getting a vote, and non-com appointing somebody and them getting a vote. They're both completely opaque, non-representative bodies. You've chosen a model which is non-representative, so just take that out of the equation. If we want to talk about representative structures in IETF, this is not where I would start. That's it.
All right, Mark, and then I have a question. We'll after you speak. Okay, so please go ahead.
Have I pressed enough buttons? Apparently.
You have pressed enough buttons. Congratulations.
Great. I do not agree with Rich and Phil. I do not think that we need to invert this, that the concerns about the person's position are something we need to keep in mind. And to Pete, I don't agree with the assertion that, oh, the LLC can just go and get rid of this person or discipline them if a problem arises. That's how we got here. All right. This is an emotional position for a lot of people for whatever reason. The power relationships are indistinct, and the LLC has a very qualified role in how governance happens here. And so saying, oh, the LLC can take care of this, I don't buy it.
Okay, Mark, stay with me for just a moment. I have a question for you. And it's not, of course, not just for you, but I'd like you to take a shot at it first, which is, how does the performance of this person get evaluated, and who does the evaluation in terms of job performance?
I think that's a great question, Elliot. That is one of the key questions that we need to be asking in this effort. You know, to all the discussion about whether this person's on the board or not, I'll reiterate what I think I said in chat and maybe online before, which is I am fine as long as this person's vote or blocking can be overcome. I'd be more comfortable if it was two other people rather than just one other person, but we'll see how it goes. But the question you just asked is really fundamental here. That people are saying that the LLC's governance of this person is equivalent to the stream managers, and it's very obviously not. So what kind of governance and oversight of this person are we talking about? And in a good solution, I think this person will have confidence in their position if they're doing a good job and they're competent and they're professional. But if they're not, then we need some way to make sure that we're getting what we're paying for, and the advice that many people are asserting that we need. And so how the community comes to a decision about that is tricky. And that's what we should be talking about, because as we've seen, it can be really controversial.
I think that was a great elaboration of my question. I wonder if, do you have thoughts as to how that would play out? Let me throw up a straw man as an example. Right? You could imagine Jay, for instance, putting out a poll to the community saying, can you please provide in confidence your view, and you being any member of the community, of the performance of the RSC, and please be specific based on the responsibilities that the RSC has. And then Jay making the decision, or the LLC making the decision. That's just a straw man, and I don't mean for it to, it matters the least amount coming from the chair. The community can come up with whatever they want on this. What would be your view?
Personally, I think that would be fine. Oh, echo.
Oops, sorry, that's me.
I think that would be fine, but I suspect, based on what we've seen, that no matter what happens, parts of the community would not accept that decision, and it would put a tremendous amount of pressure on the LLC. And if I were on the LLC, I would not want that coming at me.
Joel?
I think if we have an RSA and they have established that they know how to do the job, and they have established that they are doing a good job, and they have been reappointed multiple times, and then for reasons the community can't understand, the LLC suddenly had fired them, that would indeed cause much the same ruckus that we had. In contrast, if we have a new RSA who maybe has been in there a year or two, hasn't shown much of any real understanding, and the LLC or the executive director says, based on the feedback from the community, this person is not working and we're going to have to do a new search. Really, I don't think the community will go ballistic, and I think to the degree they will, that's a problem we have to face, but I don't see a better alternative for managing this, whether they have a vote or not. And I think that's the reality.
Yeah, okay, so, all right, I think everybody has had a pretty big say on this. Mark, I'll give you the last word, and then let's close the microphones on this, because we're going to run out of time. Thank you.
I don't disagree on any particular point with Joel there. I would just, I think that maybe there is no better solution, but I would ask that we craft in great detail the expectations for how this person is, their contract is renewed, and how the community is consulted, and so forth and so on. So there's no disagreement about what's happening, because I think that was the nexus of what happened before. And if we want this to be a smooth process, unlike every other case in the IETF, we need to write it down well. We're really bad at that. So let's try and do a better job here.
Okay, thank you for that. I hope this will come as no shock to you, Mark, but whatever we say, we need to write it down better. The chair in me says, oh good, I'm hearing a potential volunteer to help propose some of that text. So look for an email on that from me real soon now. Okay, we have spent well over an hour, close to an hour and a half, talking about this slide. First of all, I want to thank Joel for putting this together. We are not yet at consensus. I think people have heard each other on this point. I don't believe there's a lot of talking past each other at this point, to be honest. I think everybody knows everybody else's position. The only, we've heard some people say that they're, in terms of the people who are in the slightly less than the slightly greater group, that is to say, the people who would prefer the RSC not have a vote. I think we've heard some of them say that they would be a little, somewhat comfortable if there were blocking points on, there would be overrides available, particularly 2 additional chair override votes from the board in order to sustain that person's view. And I think we heard just in this last part of the conversation that at least one participant would be much more comfortable, and I think others too, if they understood better the accountability of the RSEA. So, here's my proposal. My proposal is that we run in that general direction. That what has to happen are 2 things. First, the proposal that Joel has to be encoded a little bit more with that 2 overrides. Second, we need to clarify the accountability of the RSCA in terms of how that, who that person is responsible to, and how that person will be judged. And that this would be a hold your nose compromise for most of the people who, well, at least for some of the people who did not prefer the paid professional person have a seat on the board. It would be, there would probably be a couple of people in the rough. What I propose is that we get this written down, and then we take a consensus call on it and see how rough the consensus is. This is my proposal. Before I ask for comments from the rest of the room, I just want to ask for comments from my co-chair, who I'm sort of popping this on as well, because we didn't know which way the conversation would go. So Brian, do you want to add, or you feel free to be the first person to disagree with me, by the way.
I mean, it's pretty clear to me that we're going to be in the rough consensus side on any of the major issues that we have. And so I'm okay trying to see how that goes. We have tried many things that didn't work. And so trying something else is a fine thing to do. Let's try it. Yeah, rough. That's what it is. I'll get my dog.
Right.
So sure. Go ahead.
Okay.
Let's do it. Let's try it.
We'll proceed along the. Well, first, let me ask for any comments from the group, because before we proceed, if there's a real fury in that approach, based on and you guys know the way things have worked in the past. We've had difficult conversations in the past. You know that we've been on these points for a long time. So if you have a real agita over what I'm proposing, you'll have the opportunity again to object to whatever comes out. If you have strong concerns about this proposal, please say so now. And of course, everything we talk about here and everything we agree on here has to be confirmed on mailing list as well, because we know that there are people who are not able to participate at this point. Okay, either people are fumbling for the button to ask for comment, or we're going to proceed on along those lines. And as we get to the next point, what I want to do is also just note the issue that Mike raised is something I want to query separately, and we'll take that onto the list, which is how are people concerned about the weighting of the IAB in this process in terms of it selecting the 3 of the 4 stream managers, and et cetera. And Mike, you want to take the floor on that point, or on another point? I just don't want to lose track of that issue, and I want to make sure we cover it.
I don't want to phase it. I don't want to put that in as a IAB versus everybody. I'm just saying that's one of the points with respect to the current structure. All I'm saying is that I think besides the stream managers, who are probably going to turn over maybe every year based on the composition of the bodies that are sending them, with the exception of the ISC, it might be useful to have a set of at-large members that are selected for, say, 3 years, and they turn and they're there specifically to provide some memory and some consistency going forward. So.
And then I have one additional question relating to that, which is, does that possibility of a proposal in terms of does that impact people's view on the other conversation, right, in terms of whether the RCA has a vote? If you haven't spoken on that point in particular, and you think it's something that impacts your point of view, do please comment. Mark?
Discussed this a bit in Jabro. To me, it just muddies the waters. I I'm concerned with reconstituting RSOC effectively there. I would like this advisory board to be as lightweight as possible, and that the real work happens in the working group. And to me, finding people who are willing to put their hands up to be on that advisory board, and not as part of another role, but on their own, I just have lots of questions about the quality of the candidates that we get. So to me, this muddies the waters. I'd rather just see it be the stream editors, and yes, the RSEA if that's what we need to do, and then get the balance right with those, and make it a lightweight approval board, which is how we've couched it to now. Making it more heavyweight doesn't help.
Okay.
Yeah, approval board is how it was defined, not advisory board.
Yeah. Yes, and let me just add, we don't really have time for a full-scale conversation on the merits of the proposal. Just in the context of the, I just want to understand if there's an interaction there that we need to be aware of. That was my only concern. Okay, I don't see any requests for the floor, so we're going to proceed along those lines as I proposed. I may call upon Joel to help me on this, and along with one other person. And let me just switch slide decks now. Joel, we're gonna we have to conclude your deck. I know you didn't quite get to the finished part on this, but obviously the next slide was open issues. We got a bunch of them, so we'll come back to that at another point. Let me stop sharing this one. I want to go back to the other deck for a moment. Okay, and then because we're going to run out of time, I want to make sure we get this other stuff done. Select window, and that will be this one. Okay, so, well, we didn't get to these guys yet. Surprise! Okay, let's see here. All right. Oops. So, this is our next point. Well, I'm not sure if Peter quite knows what he's gotten himself into yet. But we should all thank him profusely for offering to be a document editor. I want to just go over sort of the general approach that we're asking Peter to take. The first of which is something that the working group raised and we're responding to, which is that, in terms of normative language, things that are that really guide the role, the AD, the working group process, all of that, especially with big ticket items, right? All of that has to be run through the group in advance. Nobody's going to be advantaged by there being text that they then have to fight against because that the working group didn't discuss. Right? This is something that multiple people raised as being a concern in terms of adopting earlier work. So that's the general approach that we'll take. Now, that doesn't mean that the editor won't actually edit, right? Sometimes when we write this stuff down and the way we write it down, it sounds like Vogon poetry, to borrow an expression from a bygone era. Right? Nobody can actually read it, and people who read it can't stand it. And so it will be Peter's job to make sure not only that the consensus is adhered to, but the really tough job is that somebody who's reading this document will actually understand what we meant. And so, of course, as he smooths that language, he shouldn't be changing the meaning, and he's an excellent. One of the nice things about Peter is that he's a phenomenal master of the English language, and I'm sure he's very capable in those regards. So he'll be bringing this stuff back to us, and of course, people will have an opportunity to comment and raise concerns then. And so again, please take a moment to thank Peter, give him your sympathies, and I also want to thank, there are a couple of other volunteers, I won't name them here, but those who did volunteer, I wanted to thank them. They came in just after Peter agreed, so thank you guys. we've asked Peter to come in with at least an early draft at our next interim meeting, just prior to our next interim meeting, hopefully, with stuff with which we have agreed, and we have agreed on a fair amount. Now, just because we've agreed on text, right? Once it hits the draft, if people see concerns in text, of course you should raise them, right? And we would like to make sure that people are comfortable with the language as it reads, as the draft progresses. But we're now at the point where we do have some amount of agreement on some number of points. We have a big issue to still try and work through, and we're going to try and work through that. But hopefully by the April meeting, we will be able to see some text to which you can say, yep, that's what we said. That looks good to me. Peter will take care of some of the boilerplate, maybe some of the stuff that we'd expect in an introduction, things like that. So thanks very much for that, Peter. Next, one last slide. Our next meeting will be on the 6th of April at 8 p.m. GMT, 2000 hours GMT. This is the same time that we've mostly been holding to from the Northern Hemisphere perspective over the last few meetings, roughly speaking. However, as we head into summertime in the north and wintertime in the south, the inconvenience rises. And so we have to work out when the meeting after the April meeting will occur. And I will put out a doodle poll sometime soon for that, but please feel free to share your views both on list and to the chairs as to how you think that should proceed. Any comments on this before, or on Peter's selection, before we conclude with any other business? Okay, then we are at any other business. This is your opportunity to raise any issue you care to raise that wasn't in the agenda. All right, not seeing any requests for the floor. What I would like to do before we close is first thank very much Dominique for having taken notes. We really appreciate that. We'll get draft minutes out real soon now. And before we conclude, Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I thank you all for your participation and your thoughts, and I urge you to try and figure out how we can compromise on some of these harder issues. It's very clear that we don't have a rough consensus yet, even a rough consensus, and that means some people are going to have to change their minds in order for us to get somewhere. I don't mean change their minds, come to some kind of compromise. And you might be thinking about what it is that you could do, because some of these issues have been hanging on for a really long time, and we're going to have to power through them one way or another. So we've talked a lot to each other about what we think, and we clearly have a couple of issues for which we're going to have to come up with some compromise. Now, we did, right? I mean, the whole AV plus work group was a major compromise, and there have been a few others. But some of these issues now are going to require compromise, and I need everyone to be thinking about where they can compromise in order to make some progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Lars has asked the question if I can say something about timelines. So Lars, I can only say this: we're going to start to have a rough draft out. In fact, I'll put a milestone in the tracker for the first cut draft of what we've agreed in April. My intent is to work with Brian and Joel and Peter on some text that we can shape to put forward for sort of a compromise approach. My thinking is we'll have a discussion about that text, maybe take some amendments based on that discussion, and then have a call for a rough consensus. Now, if the discussion is very productive, or we see issues that really come out of it that we haven't raised previously, that could last beyond the April meeting. But my hope is that by the April meeting, we've included that rough consensus call. And if we have done so, then we will discuss the results of that at the April meeting. So as we go through that process, just to reiterate the point that Brian made, it's really important that people communicate with each other, not necessarily through the chairs, or even if you feel more comfortable, just go bilaterally to try and find some opportunity for to make sure that the points that you most care about are well covered, and we will attempt to find a way forward where the consensus is less rough, if at all possible, by doing that. So that's the best I can answer on the short-term timeline. If we are actually able to get through that process, then I think we can begin to build some momentum to start nail down the other issues, and maybe by the next IETF meeting we'll have one draft that at least looks promising to the group. But that's a big if. Let's recognize that, and it will very much depend on the community's willingness to let the work go forward.
Maria wanted to say something.
So, yeah, Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add on this that there are certain time constraints. I believe everybody knows that, but we have an interim RFCC manager, which we have appointed for 1 year, and this year is nearing the end. So we're already at the point where we have to make new decisions about how to extend the situation or how to handle the situation, right? So there are time constraints here, and it's hard to make any decisions. It's hard to plan. We don't know what's happening in this group. And the sooner we come to any decisions, the better, of course.
Okay, Maria, you've gotten the last word. We are over time. Thank you, everybody, for your constructive engagement, for your good comments, your good back and forth. I wish things could have gotten a little further in terms of the consensus view, but as one of our friends likes to say, if wishing were ponies, beggars would ride. So, or wishes were pony, beggars that. If wishes were ponies, beggars would ride. I couldn't get it out of my mouth even. Anyway, I wish you a very successful rest of your IETF with more consensus and highly technical content that progresses. And have a good day.
Thanks.